You are going to be fighting for the rest of your life if you believe in saving for a rainy day and saving for retirement, and she believes in building a beautiful home. That's where all that advice comes from, that time in the market and its consistency and the dividend snowball and all. They're all talking about 40 years. Well, the only way to get to 40 years is to start today. So a lot of people think my answer is going to be, well, you got to know how much debt she has. You have to know how much is in his brokerage account. That's not it. Those are going to go up and down throughout your whole life, but your values have to be aligned. I always love the couples that come in and they always think I'm going to take a side when he's like, well, she goes to Whole Foods and she buys the chopped pineapple. It's just like, why isn't she going to Trader Joe's and buying the full pineapple? It's this $1 cheaper. Warren Buffett's preaching to the choir when he says you buy it and hold forever. That is my ideal strategy. And everybody I've ever talked to who's like all about the growth starts to get more conservative and likes a few like dividends. Somehow we feel like there's a cheat sheet. Like the biggest mistake people make is they just don't do it. They just don't start.
Investors, welcome back to another episode of Masters of the Market. I am very excited for today's episode because I have none other than Elizabeth McGinnis on with me. She is a psychotherapist here to talk all about a healthy relationship with money. Now, the truth is, Elizabeth reached out to me about last week and offered to jump on the show to talk all about healthy money habits, how to invest, and all in betweens. Now, I wanted to invite her on because I think that's exactly where we should all be starting, evaluating where we stand with money. But here to talk more about all of these habits is Elizabeth herself. So Elizabeth, first of all, thank you for joining me on Masters of the Market. Absolute honor to have you on. I want to throw the first question out over to you, put you in the hot seat and ask you about your story, how you got to where you are today, and why psychotherapy and this healthy money relationships and habits.
Well, it's a fun story. So the investing story starts back when I was 13. And I think I mentioned it when we talked before, but I came home from school, you know, your parents ask you, how was it? And they want to care and they don't care. And you're like telling them about it. And I was in civics class and we were covering the stock market crash. And we were required to pick out 10 stocks and kind of watch them for 3 months and track them for a project. And my dad was like, what? This is awesome. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Okay, whatever. He's like, no, we're going to take all of your allowance money right now, everything you have saved up, and I'm going to call my broker and you're going to pick one of those stocks because back then, and I won't give the date because I'm that old, this is only enough money to buy one stock, but you're going to pick your favorite stock and we're going to actually buy it. And the lesson he was trying to teach, and it was the first lesson that really, really stuck with me, was you only learn when you have skin in the game. And that is doubly true for me. I'm the kind of person that has to learn the hard way, and not just once, but usually 2 or 3 times. So he was right. Like just tracking 10 stocks, like that would have been fun, but whatever. I would have forgotten everything I learned. But actually putting my allowance money in there and it could go up or down, like that was terrifying. So I really liked soda because, you know, what 13-year-old isn't. And so I bought 1 share of PepsiCo and I had a great time. And then I learned my second lesson by accident, which was I totally forgot I had it. And it just sat there for the next 8 years and split and split and split and got dividends and just reinvested as dividends. And I wasn't even know this was happening. And then I go off to college and, well, you know, you got to pay for college. And my dad, you know, paid for a lot of it. And I worked like 3 jobs for 4 years to pay for the other part of it. And my senior year, my dad's like, well, you've got this stock. It's now worth like that $300 that I started with when I was 13 had turned into $1,800 just by ignoring it.
Sure.
And that was awesome. So that was kind of the first lesson I learned. And that was my first journey. And then I got my first real job at, I had done computer science. So the journey to psychotherapy was hard. Like I started in computer science and I got my first job, which had been terrifying. And the second lesson my dad taught me that I kept was you pay yourself first because if you don't, you'll spend it. Like if it's in your bank account, you will spend it. And he's right. If I see it in my bank account, no matter what good intention I have, it is being spent. So my dad was like, you don't have a choice. Like you're just signing up for your 15% 401k. I was like, well, but dad, no, no, you're just doing it. And here was the second one. They had an ESPP, an employee share purchase plan. And I didn't really understand it, but I got this discount and my dad told me I should do it. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever. Like I'll buy some of this stuff. And so I did it because it was a big company. It wasn't a startup or anything. It was, and so I worked there for 4 years, and this is all happening behind the scenes. Like I set it up the day I started. And again, I never thought about it. It never even occurred to me that my paycheck could be higher. Like that was just the reality I was living with. And so I wasn't really tracking the stock market. And, it was just going into my 401k and the pre-selected stuff. It just went in every month, whatever. And this employee purchase thing is just happening over here. And I forgot I was even doing it until the day I quit. And Morgan Stanley sent me an email like, you have to re-register your account. I was like, oh, okay, sure. Why not? And that's when the next journey happened. Like my dad had talked a lot and he didn't think I listened to him at all. And a lot of it, no, it went out the air. But the last thing I listened to him was he had said if he could do it over again, he would have started his own business. And when I told him this, he was like, I never said that. What are you talking about? No, no. But I was like, I'd been working in tech in government for 4 years. I was done. I got a call to come out to California. And I was like, okay, let's go to California. Why not? Why the hell not? I'm young. Let's do it. Let's go join startup land. And I came out here, and that's when I started learning about stock options. They're not as crazy as they sound. For every Google that's amazing, you make it big, there are hundreds where you're throwing your money away. And the nice thing is you don't have to, option them until the end, till you like leave the company. And by then I was like, no way, bad choice, just straight to the stock market. I was still in my 401k automatic. But E-Trade had started to be around now. And so I was like, let's check this out. And this is the next thing, which is I have an amount where my anxiety kicks in. And I'm like, oh my God, I will screw up. I got to put it in professional hands. And so I will build my account. I've done this like 5 times now. Like I'll build it to about 10,000. I'll be like, oh my God. And then I'm like, okay, you handle it. And then I like build it and then, oh my God, you handle it. And that's still kind of what happens today. It's now bigger. It's about 10%. So 10%, I can do whatever I want. I will make some crazy bets. But after the 10% mark, boom, here you go. Here you go, professional, and all the safe stuff, conservative stuff. I'm not playing anything crazy over here. It's all you. And so I did that. I started to get into the FIRE movement, and I sat down and I was like, holy crap, if I follow this path, I'm gonna have to work in this job for another 20 years. And I freaking hate technology. Like, I don't care. I don't care about the new iPhone. I don't care about the Android. I don't care what you can do about it. And I'd been in tech for like 12 years. I was so over. I was so bored. And I was like, okay, well, if you won $1 million, what would you do? I was like, well, I just want to gossip all day. I just want to hear people's stories and talk to them and help them. And that's therapy. And well, why do you have to have $1 million to do therapy? Well, what about this? What about that? And I was like, well, yeah, but you're going to have to work another 20 years anyway. You might as well do something you like. And I was like, okay, all right, let's do it. Let's invest in yourself. And so I did stop investing in the stock market, but I chose to think of it as investing in myself. And I've never regretted that decision in the entire 10 years I've been doing this. And so I went back to grad school. It's a big shift from computer science to psychotherapy. Went back to grad school, did my hours in mental health, worked through that, used all the lessons I had learned along the way to manage my money, all that kind of stuff. And then I started treating couples, which I love. Couples are amazing. They're awesome. And it started from sex, because couples come in and almost, not every single one, but almost always can we have more sex? And it's like, yeah, we can get you more sex. And you start digging. And I gotta say, 90% of the time, I mean, that's just off the top of my head, but significant portion of the time, money is majorly getting in the way of having more sex. And so I started thinking about it. I started relating my life. There were couples, I started talking to them about their attachment, how they talk to each other, how they avoid it, how they get anxious, how they obsess about it. And the more we healed their relationship with money, the more sex they had. So I was
Wow.
like, this is awesome. And that's kind of the journey of where I ended up now. So now I focus on healing that relationship and most of the mental health I do because, the one thing you can't get away in America is like, you got to pay your bills. Money is part of life. So you've got to heal that relationship in order to move forward and grow.
So I now have a boatload of questions for you, relationship
Okay.
related with money, with partners, with how you're investing. But I guess I'll start here because, first of all, today, at least right now in this interview, it sounds like now you have a process in place. You know yourself very well. That fear seems to have dissipated over time, perhaps a little bit still there, but really not as existent. So I'll just come out and ask this: how do we know if there is a trauma there for us with money? Like, are there red flags that we can immediately be like, oh, that's trauma, and I should probably sit and reflect or evaluate or go speak to someone before I get invested or start making crazy money moves?
Yeah, that's a great question. It usually, when we start to paying attention to ourselves, it's how reactive we are, right? A lot of people who don't have a lot of trauma about money, they're the people who come on and they're like, hey, I've got this system. I'm not very emotional. I loved your guest about 2 weeks ago who was like, oh, they called me the robot. I'm like, oh, that's a man without trauma. I love it, you know? Um, and that's really true, right? The more we've healed or the more we don't have that trauma, the more it is pretty unemotional. It is pretty systematic. When we're avoiding it, we put our head in the sand. We don't want to open our bills. We avoid our partner. We go spend like crazy and we don't even check our bank account before we do it. Or the other one I see all the time, especially out here in Silicon Valley, is we have like 10,000 spreadsheets and it tracks every single penny and everything, like, where is it going? Why is it going? And I'm like, yeah, no, money is important, but once you have a system, you shouldn't need to be tracking it every single second of the day in 10,000 spreadsheets. We can have one, maybe two, but that's
Sure.
about what we need. And so it's really looking like how much or how little are we looking at our numbers? How reactive are we? Can we have a system? And can we follow the system? And that usually tells you where your traumas lie.
Where do these traumas even develop?
Ooh, I mean, I'm a psychotherapist. They all come from our parents, right? No, they don't all come from our parents, but a lot of them do. I mean, I talked about a great story from my family, but I could just as easily talk about the fights I would have to hear every month, right? Or, I bet you have a family and you could share a little bit about some of the things you overheard from your mom or your dad. Um, it also depends on what happens.
Sure.
I remember very clearly part of my trauma came from I had to get my first job right after the dot-com bubble. And I was like, holy crap. And I had just started to heal from that. And bam, the great financial crisis hit. It was like every time I was ready to take a risk, I got slammed by this great event. And that left an impression. And I had to heal those wounds, right?
Sure.
So it's not always our parents, but I would start there because a lot of parents hide fights from their kids. They hide troubles. But kids can sense when mom doesn't want to buy them new clothes. They can sense when, well, why are we moving for the third time? Why do we have to go live with grandma and grandpa? Why is everybody so angry all around me? And so that can leave you, kid doesn't know what to ask, it doesn't know what to do. It just leaves you feeling kind of nervous all the time.
Sure.
The other part that can really get in our head is who do you surround yourself with? So I love YouTube and what you do because you can find your tribe, you can find your community, people who like want to have this conversation. But man, you go to a lunch or a dinner with your friends, nobody wants to have that conversation about how much is in their bank account. Nobody wants to talk about, can they really afford to be eating dinner here? Or what would it mean to eat somewhere slightly less expensive? They don't want to have that conversation. And so it doesn't have to be big T trauma. It could just be a lot of little things that give you this kind of reactive anxiety
Sure.
around what's going down.
I feel like a lot of people would say, coming from a background of, perhaps hardships or, nerve-wracking situations or years that, kind of force them to mold their current money habits may have been their biggest motivators. And now I'll out myself. Now, just before the interview started, we were talking a little bit about my background and my family. And so I can share with you that, coming from a bit rougher of a background, a little bit broken of a family, parents divorced, I lived with my mom. And I kind of took on this role where I thought I had to do more than just be a kid. And I
Yeah.
thought I had to go out and work these neighborhood jobs and, pay for things on my own, when really, as a kid, your only role is a kid. So I kind of look at this situation to say, well, I know that was actually one of my greatest motivators, right? And it built me into the man that I am today with a lot of what I think are good financial habits, a solid foundation of I'll say risk taking behaviors, but not too much, right? And so I'm probably more risk adverse of the investors out there. What I'm getting at with this is a lot of people would say that, right, coming from that type of background would actually build you up into like almost this machine. Now, there was a shift about 6 years ago that I had where I really had to sit down and evaluate my money habits and how I looked at money and my framing. And what I realized was it wasn't so healthy. And I had to develop some kind of fencing or,
Mhm.
borders for myself to say, okay, all right, that's a little bit too stringent. And, I also jumped into the fire movement, as you mentioned. So I want to get a little bit into like what's healthy behavior, what's not healthy behavior, and is there such thing as too much? Like fire, right? Fire is a perfect example of sometimes we go a little bit too crazy. And when it gets to too much, what do we do?
Mhm. Lots of good points. Let's start back at the very beginning, right? Talking about being parentified. And most of us would agree we don't want to parentify our kids. We want them to have childhoods. But I would also, given the poverty level in America, the reality, I'm glad you didn't need to do that or it was only in your head. But there are a lot of families that need their kid to earn money, that need their kid to work in their restaurant, who need their kid to be helping out. That's just a reality. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's going to traumatize you, but it does depend on your family's reaction to it, right? There's a difference between, hey, I want to give you some lessons. I want to teach you. I mean, my first job was when I was 12 and I was babysitting around, right? Like the reason I had $300 back then was because I had worked a lot of babysitting jobs and I got I got my allowance. I mean, it was like this much, right? But my first real job was my first W-2 was 15 and it wasn't just because I wanted to work. It was because my parents didn't have a ton of money at that point, right? And a lot of kids grow up like that. But where the trauma happens, where it starts to ingrain them, is when you're scared, if you don't work, you're not going to have a roof over your head. If you're scared, you're not going to have food on the table, right? That's when we start to get some really bad habits, when it's that fear of survival mode. Having your kid work so they can pay for their new shoes. So, like me, I mean, my jobs were to pay for gas for my car, to pay for my insurance for my car. I only got it because I was working. That's a great example of a good motivator versus, oh no, we need you to bring a paycheck home because that's the only way we can pay our gas bill. That's when we start to generate a lot of anxiety in our kids. And that starts to create a lot of bad habits going forward. Because you mentioned how do we start to notice the difference between a motivator and a bad habit? It's all about the choice. If you're choosing, like your last guest, I loved his story and he was talking about it. He was making choices. Oh, I want a second job because I want to throw more money in. That's a choice. He's looking at a situation and saying, this is what I want, versus, I don't know. Is this enough money? Is this enough money? I don't think this is enough money. Okay, I better get a job. I have to get a job. I better grind and grind and grind and grind and grind. And that's finally taking us to fire, right? That's where it can be really helpful, but hurtful at the same time. If you are leaning in and it becomes a choice, I mean, I love Mr. Money Mustache. I read his stuff all the time. I think they're hilarious. I think he's fun. And he talks about a choice, a deliberate choice he's making for his family or what he's doing. And it's not a sacrifice. But when we start to just sacrifice and grind and be reactive and just terrified that it's not going to be enough, that's when it starts to be a bad habit. That's when we really need to take a look at ourselves and what's going on.
Interesting. So I'll share, I guess some psychotherapy here, right? On my end, what it turned into was I'm not going to ever have enough. And I can share outright, for me, I got sober about 6 years ago. My whole life radically changed 6 years ago, and all for the better. But in that kind of, bottoming out time in my life and a lot of the shifting on my money paradigm, what happened was I realized that uh, I had enough, right? Like I was okay. And that drive for more and more and more was, I think, useful for a period of time up until it wasn't, kind of like you shared. Where is enough? What is enough? And how do we know when we have enough? For me, it was kind of this moment that was like, Ari, one day you're gonna die and you're not really living. You're just working and slaving away. Are you ever going to enjoy? And that was a part of my shifting moment. But like, how do we all kind of get to this moment of, no, I have enough. I'm okay.
In therapy, you learn about this thing called the miracle question. And I kind of, without even realizing it, had done it to myself. When I had said, like, okay, well, if you won the lottery and you had $1 million, like, what would you do? And the reality is, yeah, I would blow it on vacations for like 2 years and travel and do all that good stuff. And then what? Because I like working. I like being part of society. I would get really bored. I mean, I would have a really good time on an island for about 6 to 9 months. And then I'd be bored. And then what? Like, what am I going to do? And by asking that question, okay, if you had enough and like 10x, whatever you think your enough number is, you know, okay, then what? What would you do if you had enough? And again, jump forward that 2 years after you've gone on the vacation, after you've bought the yacht, after you've done all that crazy nonsense. Like, okay, now what are you going to do? Well, you probably still want to get married. You probably want to at least have a conversation about family. You probably want to contribute to society in some way. Okay, well, do you really need $100 million? Do you really need $10 million? Do you even need $1 million? Like, do you have enough to do that? And that's kind of where I came from, right? Like, I looked at my bank account and went, yeah, I have enough to take a risk. I have enough. I don't need to be grinding it out at a high paying job for the rest of my life. I have enough. And that's a way to ask that question, is to use the miracle question to really force yourself to examine, what do I want? If I had 10x what I think my number is, what would my day-to-day life, and it's really your day-to-day life, because we all want the yacht, we all want the island vacations, we all want all that good stuff. But what do you want your Wednesday to look like? How do you want to spend your Monday? I would take a good guess that you would still want to interview people and talk to people. Would it be about this? I don't know, but I doubt you would turn into a recluse living on an island. What would you do? If you had enough, what would you do?
Now I'm on the hot seat.
Yeah.
It's interesting because as you were sharing, I'll mention this. I was thinking, about Warren Buffett, and I was thinking about Jeff Bezos, and all those who quote unquote made it. And what's interesting is that they never really talk about money. They talk about the thing that, like, Warren Buffett always talks about, just loving math and loving, dissecting businesses, great businesses. And Bezos always talks about, the mechanics of a business and, right, like the workings of a business. And most of us, I feel like, again, outing myself, when I first started, I'm talking about money. So you asked me this question, now, and I'm sitting here and I'm saying, the greatest thing, I mean, these days, now I'm very drastically different, but my Wednesday, what do I want to do? I want to sit, thankfully, I live near a beach. I want to sit in the beach in the morning with a cup of coffee and watch the waves come in and watch the waves go out. And that's a very different answer from the person who may have been on this interview, 7, 8 years ago, sharing with you that I want to wake up, I want to go to the gym at 5:30, 6 a.m., which is what my old schedule used to look like. And then I would want to be the first guy in the sales pit of the office to start dialing down on 100 plus phone calls because I got to get the next bonus and I got to get, all the commission, and I got to invest that. And I can't go out with friends because if I go out with friends, I'm going to spend 60, $70, and I'd rather take that and put it into the market. That was my old life. And these days, life is very peaceful, and it's radically different. So
Yeah.
it really it's very interesting. And again, like I don't want to say I was a part of, I guess I was a part of FIRE for a little bit. That I was obsessed with just this idea of freedom. But being free doesn't necessarily mean you just made millionaire status, or I don't know, 100 millionaire status or billionaire status, and that's it. Um, and so I think just even in this conversation now, that red flag should almost be coming up for all of us. And correct me if I'm wrong, if we're chasing without any idea of what we're chasing.
Exactly. Because if we're just chasing, we're reacting. It's not a choice, right? Choosing to say, I mean, I'm right there with you. In my 20s, man, I would work an 80, 100-hour week and I would just grind it out because, well, one, in your 20s, you have that kind of energy. And two, like you're figuring it out. And to be quite honest, like I would go out at midnight with my friends because, well, I'm 20 and I got the energy for it. But that's one, once you have those experiences, you recognize what you want and what you don't want. And sometimes you love it. Like there are people who love that life. This is Silicon Valley. I'm surrounded by people who, quote, have passion for their jobs, which I could go on a rant about. But a lot of them do. A lot of them love getting in the weeds and dissecting the problem and going in and being at the lab until midnight to figure out this engineering problem. But the reality is, if you gave them a lot of money, and let's be clear, like the people at Apple and Google and Microsoft who are making 500,000 and are single and have probably $1 million or $2 million in stock ops, like, yeah, they're there because they want to be, right? They could leave and go live in Nebraska or Iowa or wherever and for the rest of their life. They're there because they want to be. And so it's okay to grind when we see it as a choice, right? If you want to say, I want to pause on spending money on going out and on vacations to really grind for 6 years to get my leg up, to really build a nest egg, to have security because I grew up with money insecurity. Like, okay, that's a choice. But if we're just like, I have to, we got a problem. We gotta lean back and kind of heal what's going on there.
Wow. So let's say someone has now a lump sum of money and they want to begin investing, and perhaps they have some of these money habits that weren't so healthy. They're in the transitional, maybe they're watching this interview right now and saying, I got to work on this. But they get to this point where they have to invest this money. Where should they start so they start on the right foot and not necessarily, you get a lot of the times people throwing all their money into Bitcoin or penny stocks thinking they can be rich by next Tuesday. And I almost feel like that's unhealthy in and of itself. Most times we lose that money. Where should we start to start on the right foot and on a healthy path forward?
Well, so I really think the system is how there's all these different systems out there, right? And I love them all for different reasons. I can never remember their names, but there's one investor who's like, don't diversify, like just really know what you know and pick like 5 stocks and go hard, right? And then there's another person who's like, just index fund it all. Or there's somebody else who's like, you got to diversify across all the different areas. and you should have 20 to 25 different stocks. And, there's the dividend investors and the growth investors and the meme stocks. There's all this stuff. And the reality is, one thing they all have in common is they're not sitting on the sidelines. They're saying, okay, I have to learn the hard way. I got to just buy my stock. I got to buy my PepsiCo. Yeah, penny stock might be a waste of money. I have lots of stories that were really dumb decisions that I made, but I learned something from every single one of them. So the system to set up is start slow and learn a lesson each and every time and start. Like, the biggest mistake people make is they just don't do it. They just don't start because it's too scary. Or what if I lose it all? Like, yeah, you might lose it all. And guess what? You're never going to make that mistake again. I once invested in a company. So I love believing in the future. And I don't care how great your company is. If I think you are, excuse my language, I'm not going to invest in your company because I don't want to constantly be thinking about how much of a jerk you are. But that means that sometimes I can get overly bought into a story. And I can remember one particular small cap that I was like so excited. They were going to change the world. It was awesome. So pumped. And then they rode that right into bankruptcy. And I didn't get any of my money back. Like, it was gone. And I learned a valuable lesson. Like, just because I want to change the world, just because I like that story, like, that is not enough. And I have to do more. But I've never made that mistake again. Right. And that means the next time I'll make a better decision. And that means next time it'll grow. And you got to just do that. And so my answer to those people is, would I invest in a penny stock? No, that's too much anxiety for me. But if you invest in penny stocks, you're going to learn a hell of a lot really, really fast. And then next time you'll make some different choices, whatever those are.
Sure. Sounds like the University of Hard Knocks. I
A little bit.
graduated magna cum laude, top of my class, University of Hard Knocks.
I
But
mean, that's what life is, right? Like, it's just a series of lessons, and everybody either learns them when they're young or they learn them when they're old, but everybody learns the same things. We don't have a
sure,
choice. That is life.
sure.
And that's true for everything, but somehow we feel like there's a cheat sheet to money. And what I would say is, if you are buying into a get rich quick scheme or a cheat sheet, I've got this lesson I can sell you. I've got this course you can learn everything you ever need to know. I'm going to make you a Forex trader. I'm going to make it. Yeah, you're probably sold a bill of goods. Like, the reality is, it's going to suck and you're going to lose some money and you're going to have some anxiety and you're going to have to try again. And you might find out that, I mean, I hear a lot of people who almost switch. Like, everybody I've ever talked to who starts as a dividend investor slowly starts to realize the value of growth. And everybody I've ever talked to who's like all about the growth starts to get more conservative and likes a few like dividends. And it's because they're learning different lessons, but they finally get here. Right. And that's everybody's story. Can you think of a story where, like, you started one place, but if you had to think about it now, you're in a different boat?
I'm always I mean, look, I think if you're not learning and you're not growing, that stagnation is in of itself a bit of a death, because
Mm-hmm.
you need to grow as an investor, as a human walking in this world. And if you're not growing and you're not doing and you're not trying, I mean, really, what is there to live for? I mean, that's my outlook on it. And to take a little bit of that risk, know your level of risk tolerance, but
Yeah.
have a little fun, take a little risk, because at the end of the day, as cliche as it is, right, we're not bringing all the materials to the grave with us. And so, okay, what was the life that we lived, and was it enjoyable? Now, I want to ask you this because, okay, so it's all about time in the market, right? At least get started, try a trial and error, learn who you are as an investor. What type of investor are you? How do you invest? And can you talk to us a little bit? Because it really sounds like you have a steadfast, process and strategy down. I'm curious to know what that 10% rule is that you have, and what you started off investing in, and how you're investing these days.
Well, so it started back in the day and it was pretty much mutual funds because that's what lives in your 401k, right? Like, it was a mutual fund. That's what it is. And then when I moved out here and everybody's talking about it, and it was always like, what startups are going to do this and who's going to get big and what's going on. That's when I really started getting into like individual stocks. But all the experts say, don't get individual stocks. You're going to lose your shirt. Nobody can make a pick. You don't know what a pick is. But like, that's where to me the fun is. And so my general rule was, okay, 90%, don't mess around, man. Like put that in the safe stuff, mutual funds, ETFs, index funds, whatever that is. That's my personal rule. Don't take risks there. But if you don't take a risk or two, one, you don't learn, and two, it's boring. And if you can't tell, I like having some fun. And so I use that 10% and I do it every week. I've played around with like daily, monthly, whatever. Daily's too much. Like I got a business to run, I got a life to lead, like I got too much stuff going on. But every month, like then you're sitting there timing everything. Like, what is the right time to buy? What like no. So I just buy every Wednesday. And because it's fun money, I don't buy ETFs because that's for that 90%. Like that's for the safe money. I put my money where I put my mouth. Like, what do I believe in? And so every Wednesday, it's a very small amount, but I buy some stock, whatever I want. And I've had different systems over the year. My current system is in January, I kind of look at the world and I pick 5 stocks that I believe in their story, that I believe are the right time to buy because they're beaten down or they're just not doing well right now. But I think they're going to do really well like next year. Because my bad habit is I hate selling. I hate selling. I can buy and own forever. But man, when I pick a dog, it crushes me to sell it. Like it's hard. Um, so I try to buy when it's a dog, knowing that like it's going to be a rough year and the next year or the year after it's going to look really good. And so then every week I can buy whichever of those 5 stocks I want, but I can't buy outside of those 5 stocks. That's my current system because then you get like, ooh, shiny object syndrome. What about this one? Then about that one, you know? And so I don't like to do that because I've done that before and it's fun, but it doesn't result in a lot. So then all year I'll buy those 5 stocks. And then in December, like I kind of look at it, see what's going on and make my plan for next year. So that's my current system.
Love that. And okay, so 90% is there in an index or ETF, mutual fund. What fund is that 90% with right now?
So a lot of it is in various Vanguard ones. Um, and I definitely pick ETFs based on like what I don't want to do research in. So like I know commodities are valuable. You could listen to people on YouTube all day long about gold and silver and plutonium, and I don't care. I don't care. I don't want to research mines. I don't want to figure out if such and such place is about to have a revolution and that's going to nationalize my mind. Like I don't want to know. So I buy ETFs there where I know I'm not going to do the research. And if you're not going to do the research, you are kind of throwing your money away. So like I'm not going to. So there we go. If they ever came out with some sort of like Bitcoin ETF, I'd probably buy that because I don't care about Bitcoins and stable coins and all that nonsense. And I don't want to figure out which ones are good ones and bad ones. So that would be a good use of an ETF right there. So any of the ETFs that might be industry specific that I don't ever want to look into or just general ones like Vanguard where it's super easy. So those are
Sure.
kind of the easy money, just throw it in, let it do
Lowest
its
of lowest fees as well.
exactly. Exactly.
Now you have on top of the 90%, you have the handful of stocks that you invest into. So is
That's
it
right.
always it's this 90% chunk and then about 5 stocks with the remainder of that 10%?
Oh no, so the 10% grows and like I said, I'm a terrible seller. It's not like I sell the last 5 and buy the new 5. Like that would make sense, but that's not my psychology. Like I'm a buy forever. You know, I am Warren Buffett's preaching to the choir when he says you buy it and hold forever. That is my ideal strategy. So I probably own about 25 individual stocks because things will change year to year. Like 2 years ago, Palantir was one of my stocks and I just bought it all year. I'm not buying it right now, but it's still there, still hanging out in my portfolio. Super happy with it. It's doing great this year. Hopefully it does great next year. I don't want to buy any more of it right now. It's not part of my top 5 for this year. But yeah, there's probably 25 in there. But this year I'm only buying 5.
And now when it comes to picking out these stocks, right? You said you don't want to pick the dog. Or I'm sorry, no, you want to pick the dog in the bad year and hold on to this. How do we know when we have a dog in front of us?
Well, sometimes you make a mistake. I've definitely done that. And again, I would never look to me for financial advice. Like I am good for relationship, money, like that kind of advice, but like um there's a reason I didn't become a financial advisor. But I kind of look at the world and what do I see is coming down the line. So like I'm probably 100% wrong, but like I think inflation's going to really damage everybody. I think this is going to be a really, really rough year for a lot of people. And I think everybody's caught up in the hype and they're buying the Magnificent Seven and those, like, I would love to buy the Magnificent Seven, but they're like really rich right now. And I think people are just piling in and that's what's happening. So I look at it and I go, well, if I truly believe that this is an inflationary year and people are going to have it rough and things are going to get hard, well, nobody's buying some of these dividend stocks. Nobody's buying some of these kind of staple stocks. And so I bought like, I've got 2 food stocks because you always got to buy food, right? I'm buying some gas stocks because, well, nobody wants to buy them right now. And so like now's a good time to pick them up. And, you know, historically, they do really well later. Will I buy them next year? Probably not. But this year, that's the story I've bought into. That's the story I'm committed to. So those are the stocks I'm buying. Right.
Sure. Now, I want to go back to this because you were sharing when it comes time to sell a stock, you never want to sell. But of course,
Oh,
sometimes, I mean, really, it's like a glaring, like, you gotta sell this stock. How
yes.
do we know when it's time to sell? Just in case we pick up a stock in this, coming year and we're watching, maybe it's a Magnificent Seven, maybe it's not, but we're like, okay, this did not go as expected, as life never really does. But I got to sell this thing. When is that time?
So there's the mistakes and then there's the system. And the mistake is when you get attached, right? Um, like what I was telling about, like when I really bought into that story and I thought they were going to change the world. And so I was like, okay, yeah, their financials aren't great. Yeah, like they just slipped before a dollar and got their notice from NASDAQ. Like, yeah, but you're not taking in the new data. You're not following a system. You're now just attached to this thing, right? And it's okay to make that kind of mistake. It happens. Nobody's perfect. But now I have some systems in place so that doesn't happen to me again, right? So for instance, if I no longer think I want to own it in 5 years because they've had a change in management or something, anytime new information comes in, like I had owned some 3M and then it got, sued for all this stuff. And it was like, oh, do I want to own a company that's getting sued for this? Like, do I think it'll still be around in 5 years? Do I still think like, and I had to go through that whole process. And what I decided was I still thought it would be around in 5 years. Like it does a gazillion things, but I didn't trust the management anymore. Like I didn't necessarily think they were making really good decisions. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But part of my process is if I no longer trust management to make a good decision, it's time to sell. So I don't look at how much money I've lost because that makes me not want to sell. And I go ahead and sell it. So that's my system of anytime new information comes in, if I don't trust that it'll be here in 5 years or I don't trust the management, then I go ahead and sell the company. And I used to look at financials, but one, I'm not an accountant. It all just feels like nonsense to me. I'm like, okay, but are you lying? Is this real? Like, what does this actually mean? Everybody always says past is not predictor of the future. Like, I don't know. So I go on management because I trust my own ability to read people. And so I'm like,
Psychoanalyze.
okay, to psychoanalyze them, right? And so I look at the CEOs, I look at how they talk about their employees, I look about how they treat their employees, and that's how I make that decision.
Would
Everybody has, but the point is, I have a system now for how I let those go. I still don't like it. I still really, really hate it, but that's part of the reason I only pick 5. So there's fewer that I have to let go at any given time.
Sure. So you have this portfolio of about 20 to 25, and then you focus on 5. Would you say you're more dividend stock heavy, growth stock heavy? I know this year you said you were leaning more towards the staple stocks because they really are, a lot of them are discounted. Is it dependent all on the macros in the year?
Depends on what I understand and the macros. Yeah. I mean, I was in tech for 12 years. I live in Silicon Valley. I do play around in that world a little bit because I get it. But if I don't understand it, I don't buy into it. So AI is this great example. I've worked on AI systems before. I have a general idea of like what's cool and what's like, yes. At the same time, I don't know the difference between OpenAI and Gemini and Bard and some of these others. Like, can I tell you why one's better than the other? No, I haven't done my research. I don't want to do my research. I'm probably not going to invest in that right now, even though there's probably really great growth there, because I don't understand the value proposition. I don't understand the use case. And if I don't get it, I'd rather just pass because I have bought into stuff where I'm like, I don't get it, but if everybody says it's cool, like, sure. And then it always blows up in my face. So that was a lesson I learned the hard way. So now, even if I miss the boat, like I I wait until I get what I'm buying.
So first of all, I feel like I should invite Jeff back on, Jeff Teeples, the man who said he was a robot, and say, I think I found someone more systematic. uh, I want to ask you this one. So you have this system in place. You have, 90% in funds, very safe. You have your 10%, I'll say gambling, but not so much gambling because there's a big system behind that. Um, when it comes to actually building out a portfolio, now you stuck with 20 to 25 stocks and I'll push aside that 90%. Is there such thing as too many stocks in someone's portfolio? Like, would it be an addictive behavior maybe to have like 100 plus holdings? And should we just
I
buy
mean,
an ETF?
I'm not going to give a number because everybody's brain works a little bit differently. Everybody likes to spend their time differently, but I would say if you're spending more than 10% of your time researching and looking into them, you have too many stocks. This is not supposed to be your life. Like if you're a financial advisor or a stockbroker, like, yeah, it's probably your life. Like it's your job. You're being paid to look into these things. But this is your free time. Like you should be dating or taking care of your kids or taking your dog for a walk or, painting or whatever it is your jam is. Um, and yeah, researching stocks can be interesting, but if it's taking up more than 10% of your time, then you have too many stocks, right? And at that point, yeah, get an ETF. I mean, I told you, it's not that I don't think metals aren't important, but I don't want to research them. I got better
Sure.
things to do with my time. So yeah, go get an ETF.
I'm going to put you in the hot seat with this question. So again, all these systems are in place. It sounds like you have a very healthy strategy now. And
Oh,
money habits, effective money habits, also sounding healthy from what we can all tell. If we were to all acquire your money habits and your strategies and your systems, I mean, where would that get us portfolio value wise? What's the total value right now of your portfolio?
oh, you told me you were going to ask this question, and I told you I was going to avoid you. Um, I have to be careful how much I reveal because of my job, and I don't feel comfortable. What I will say is, um, it's my enough number, and one day I will be a millionaire, and it is not today. But my enough number is enough that I sleep well every night, right? And I can invest in things outside of the stock market. So I will say that, like, life is not just about throwing money in the stock market, right? When I say I invested in myself to go to school, like that was a big risk for me. I started my business. That's investing in me. I'm still investing in my business all the time. Um, I view vacations as investing in myself. It's a choice. Like that's $5,000 I could have put in my bank account. I could have put in the stock market, but I also know I'm not going to want to go to Vietnam when I'm 65. And I know that what I learned in Vietnam has created better habits, has created a better relationship with myself. So that's that kind of what I'm talking about with that choice, right? Do I want to make the choice to never invest in the stock market? No, but I want to make choices that are about living my life too, right? And that's I have enough to make some of those choices to have a life and go do those things.
That is, I think, I want to call it here, one of the greatest answers that I've had come back at me from asking that question. Because I can share, right now at this point in time, not a millionaire, but in my heart and my mind, a billionaire. And the reason being is because that true wealth switch that happened for me 6 years ago was like, you're okay. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to work out. And that allowed me to actually shift gears into focusing on what I really like to focus on and reading more and living a little bit more of life, which I think makes me a billionaire. Whether or not that's financially in my bank account doesn't matter. And I think that's what you just shared now. So I absolutely love that answer. I want to ask you this. So a lot of people are scared to get in the market. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very, I mean, I'm sure we can both attest, very scary to just jump in. You don't really know what you're doing, and but if you take the average Joe on the street, he's not invested, um, he or she is not invested, but time is ticking away and retirement is surely coming. How can we overcome those fears to jump in and just start?
So a lot of it is, what are you scared of? Right? For me, it was, you're not an expert. What the hell do you know? Everybody says stock picking is a bad idea. So how did I overcome that? Like, I got a financial advisor. And there's lots of people who tell you that's a waste of money, and they're not wrong. But I also know that without it, I wouldn't have done anything. So sometimes it's not about right or wrong or the perfect system. It's about what helps you take that next step, right? What gets you one step closer? And for me, it was having somebody with me. It was having somebody talk me through some of these strategies. I think YouTube is great. It's changed a lot of it. It's, part of what got me into it was listening to other stories like yours, like some of your guests, just average people who were not financial advisors or who were not economics bros, who were not, up on all the news. They like their regular job was being manager of a store or being a real estate broker, whatever it was. And what did they do next? And it was like, oh, well, if they can do that, like, it's not that I think I'm smarter than them, but like, I don't think they're smarter than me either. Maybe I can try this too. So those were my fears and the step I took to do that. If your fear is just like, oh, but I might lose it all, well, then don't put it all in, right? Like, I'm scared of losing it all. So I have 10% that's play money. Do I want to lose it? No. But that's why I have 90% in the safe stuff, right? So it's about just saying like, okay, just do this piece, take one step. And that's where I think a lot of people, it's like a marathon, except for crazy people. Nobody wants to run 26 miles. Like, are you nuts? But, you could take a walk around your block. You could go run for a mile, right? Like maybe next week you could do 3 miles. It's the same thing. Like, look at what you can do right now. That's one step. That's where all that advice comes from, that time in the market and its consistency and the dividend snowball and all. They're all talking about 40 years. Well, the only way to get to 40 years is to start today. And, some of your guests have talked about like, hey, once they started, this kept them going or this motivated them. I mean, I loved your last guest who was like, I'm addicted to dividends. I'm like, I get it. They're sweet. They're nice. That's a reinforcement mechanism he has given himself. That's very rewarding. Um, that's not a bad system. That's a great system, right? I've talked to a lot of people who love getting that monthly check, and all they do is reinvest it. I mean, they've got their own job, they got their cash flow from that. Like, they're not living off their dividends right now, but that keeps them motivated for that next one, that next one. The other thing I would say is pick a smaller goal. People are like, oh, I want to be $1 million, or, oh, I got to get to $10,000. Like, yeah, like I would love to have $1 million, but that is not my goal this year. That is not my goal this year. My goal this year is very small. It's achievable. My goal for next year will be small and achievable. Um, and guess what? Over time, hopefully that turns into $1 million. But that's easier to believe in. Where people get really stuck is I got to put it all in. And that's where they make those really big bets. I'm going to put it all in Dogecoin. I'm going to put it all in GameStop. And it's like, hey, you want to play that game? Great. Put $100 in. But maybe put the other $100 in something else.
Sure.
Maybe keep that and learn your lesson about GameStop, whatever that is. Maybe it's that you can short somebody. Maybe it's that meme stocks are your thing. You love them. Maybe it's that, oh my God, that roller coaster made your stomach clench up. That's not for you. I don't know what lesson you're going to learn. Learn something. You've got your 100, you only put $100 in. So now you've got this 100 in reserve. Okay, now you can put it in for something else. So that's what I would say is make small goals. Don't shoot for the $1 million. Shoot for something small. Your last guest said like, hey, it was my first 10,000. Like, yeah, that's kind of big. Like maybe shoot for your first 1,000. Then it's like, oh, okay, let's shoot for my first 5,000. Then like something that you think you can do this year. And that's going to keep you motivated in a way that, how am I ever going to make $1 million? That's going to keep, of course, that's going to keep you out.
I think, these days, the biggest wealth factor, at least for me, has become whom I surround myself with.
Yes.
Personal relationships, romantic relationships, professional relationships. I really do believe in we are who we surround ourselves with, or we ultimately will become who we surround ourselves with. And I think, again, this big wealth factor is if I'm spending so much time with my partner, my girlfriend, uh, I want to have the healthiest, the wealthiest relationship with her, and soon to be, coming years, a family. I want to ask you from your standpoint, how do we cultivate a very healthy relationship? So, yeah, in our brokerage accounts, in our bank accounts, that financial stability is there. But how do we keep that health and wealth also in the family and our relationships, romantically, professionally, personally?
So a lot of people think my answer is going to be, well, you got to know how much debt she has. You have to know how much is in his brokerage account. That you have to, that's not it. Those are going to go up and down throughout your whole life. But your values have to be aligned. You are going to be fighting for the rest of your life if, I'll take the stereotypes because a lot of people fit them, right? If you believe in saving for a rainy day and saving for retirement, and she believes in building a beautiful home, you're both investing in yourselves. But every time she wants to decorate, you're going to think it's too much. And every time you're stressing out a little bit because you've had a dip in income, so you can't save as much that month, you're going to be stressing out and fighting with each other, right? Whereas if both of you say, hey, we need to have a balance, and the number one priority is having our retirement, and then our second one is our home, well, now you're not really having fights. Like that system is now in place. Like you're following in that. And a lot of it's just reducing the friction. People fight when they're actually having a values fight every single time. I always love the couples that come in and they always think I'm going to take a side when he's like, well, she goes to Whole Foods and she buys the chopped pineapple. It's just like, why isn't she going to Trader Joe's and buying the full pineapple? It's this dollar cheaper. And she's sitting there like, he's such a cheap asshole, right? Like, why is he doing this? And they think they're fighting about pineapple. And I'm like, oh, that's not the fight we're having here. We're having a fight because he thinks that every single nickel they have should be going maybe to pay off their credit card debt. And she thinks the number one investment they should be making is into their health and into their time. And they're not having that conversation. They're having a pineapple conversation, and they're having it every week because you go to the grocery store every week, right?
Sure.
And that's where all those constant fighting comes from. So it's about, one, making sure you talk about your values, that you don't sweep them under the rug. You don't pretend that there's not a conflict there. And two, you know how to have a conversation about it. You don't, the number one thing I hear is he's staying up at night because he's so worried about money in some way. Like, I'm not making enough, I'm not doing enough, but he's never telling his wife that, hey, he's a little bit afraid of being laid off. So maybe this is not the year to build the pool. Maybe this is the year to hold off. And usually she's totally on board, like, oh my God, you're so anxious. Like, let's do this thing. But he doesn't want to disappoint her and he's afraid of a fight. And feels like a child because he's always holding the purse strings and saying no. And I told you, right? It leads to no sex. He doesn't want to bring it up, so he avoids her. She feels like a child, so now she's pissed. So now nobody's talking, and nobody's touching, and nobody's having a good time. And really, all we had to do was have a conversation about what is important to our family, and let's both get on the same page. So you want a healthy, wealthy relationship? Talk about your values, talk about your money values, and talk about how are we going to resolve it when we don't agree.
Wow. I don't know if you saw the episode with Shalish, and phenomenal, phenomenal episode, but her husband came to her and said, "Hey, we need to do something about our finances." And she, was really watching, from what I recall, a lot of reality TV shows, slowly started introducing financial habits and fell in love with it. Then she actually took the reins on those financial habits. Now she's the one who invests and he's a little bit more laid back. But it's interesting to me. I mean, it's all sounds like communication, coming to the table, meeting each other, and being truthful with where you're at. What happens in the
Yeah.
event that like someone really is this super saver and gets a lot of anxiety, and this other person wants to make the financial changes, but they're at this kind of fork in the road of like, well, I'm not changing and I'm not changing. What do we do?
Well, usually you end up in couples counseling. Um, it comes down to love, right? A lot of times that's just a symptom of being done with the other person. You've lost so much trust in each other that you can't trust in their vision. But if that's not what's happened, you still really, really like you're two separate people. You're never going to agree to everything. And if you really love this person and you've built trust along the way, well, then you can disagree. And what you do is you time box it, okay, you're really anxious right now, you really need to save. I can't agree with you, like I just don't. I think we have enough. I think we're okay. I'd rather go to Paris this year. Like I just don't know I just can't agree with you, but you know what, I love you and I care about you, and for 12 months we can put your priority ahead of mine. But we need to put something on the calendar for 12 months from now where we're going to revisit this conversation. And in the meantime, this is what I need from you to not resent the hell out of you to not go to Paris. I need you to start therapy to talk about your anxiety, or I need you to, be working more hours so that you're making more income so that you're satisfying this anxiety, or we need to have a conversation about me going back to work. Maybe that would make you feel less anxious because it's not one income. Whatever it is, what we're really saying is these are the conditions so I don't resent you. Because where couples get in trouble isn't I can put you first, but when they don't time box it. So now it feels like forever. Nobody can do anything forever. We all fall apart. We all get pissed as all get out if we have to do anything forever. So one, always put a limit. Okay, we're going to talk about it in a month. We're going to talk about it in a year. And two, really be honest with yourself. Don't ever do anything you're going to resent. Because if you're going to resent it, that's what kills a marriage. Don't be afraid of saying, like, okay, I can put my needs second and I need XYZ from you.
Team dynamics. That's what I'm hearing. Great team dynamics and communication. I have one last question for you. And I first, just before I ask this, I have two things to say. First of all, this has been incredibly enlightening, powerful, inspiring, everything in between to have you on. So I'm so thankful that you reached out and that we were able to jump on this Masters chat together. The second thing I want to share is, I'll wrap up with a question, and then I'll close out with what I'll share here. But Elizabeth, I always give every guest a hypothetical $10,000 gift to invest it in any individual stock, as I'm sure you know. I'm curious to know which stock you would invest it in and why.
I actually wouldn't do a stock. I would do something called Fundrise. You heard of this?
I have.
Yeah. I diversity makes me chill out, and I live in California, so even if I had $1 million, I couldn't buy a home. I would have to have like $10 million to buy a home here. Um, but talking about all my principles, like I really like and trust the people who run it. From what I've discovered online, like I have no inside information. I just read things online. I listen to their podcast. I like them. They seem trustworthy. I like who they are. I like their model. It makes me feel like I can get into real estate without having to do all the parts I don't want. I don't want to be your manager. I don't want to fix your toilet. I don't want to take a risk. I don't know about property. I don't know what's a good area and a bad area. And frankly, I don't want to figure it out. I'd rather read a psychology book. That's what I like. So it fits all the criteria, right? Like I don't want to do the research. I really trust the management team. There's a little bit of a diversity. Um, so I think that's really like I would do fundraise. Does that
I love
qualify?
that.
Am I
It
that answer?
qualifies. I'll take it. Now, here's the last question I'll ask. It's really for everybody else. So we have learned a whole heck of a lot, at least I have. And I want everybody to understand where they can find you, how they can reach you. Do you have a website, an email you want to share, or anything? Because if we are really looking, and I'm on a mission here to help everybody get on a financial freedom journey, it doesn't mean make $1 million or $10 billion. It means get to that enough point for all of us. So, Elizabeth, where exactly can we find you and how do we reach out to you?
All right. Well, I would tell you to go to my website, elizabethmcginnis.com, or on Instagram. And I hate that I'm on Instagram, but I am. It's there, at EM Psychotherapy. And I would really encourage all your guests who are, like I said, I love couples. And so I've created this quiz called Money and Us to help you figure out, like, do I need a little bit of help, like having these conversations with my partner, or am I feeling good? It's like 10 questions. It's really short, but you'll get a really good idea if you've got some healthy relationship dynamics around money from these 10 questions. So I would really encourage anybody to just go to my website, find that quiz, and see where you sit with it. It's pretty awesome.
Wow. I love it. We will all be there. I'll be there after this chat. So,
All
Elizabeth,
right.
thank you so much for joining me on Masters of the Market. I absolutely am thrilled to have had you on and to have shared everything that you shared with the world, with everybody who's watching and investors. Until next time, we will see you all there.